if you follow my car or garden films, you'll know I've got a lot of gourds. We grew these in the garden last year. It's been sitting here in big shed drying for, I guess the last 8 or 9 months, and they're ready to be sort of cleaned up. This is one I've cleaned up already. You can tell when they're ready because the outside goes very hard and you can hear the dried seeds rattling around inside them. The stuff on the outside is just sort of mold, and what you do is you clean that off. I'm using a stainless steel pot scouring pad, and I use that to rub them off. And this is a gourd I've picked for a project. I've got lots of gourds and not very many violins, so I'm going to make a gourd violin. I'm going to try to. I don't know why. I don't actually know how to play a violin. We do have one, which I'm using to see how they're put together, and I bought a very, very cheap set of violin parts from AliExpress. I think it was about $30, and that's for the scroll part at the end and the fretboard part. I'm not even sure I'm using the right names for these. Pegs, strings, the bit that goes on the bottom where your chin goes, all of those came in this kit of parts. It's really crappy quality, obviously, but it's a violin made out of a gourd. It's not exactly going to be great. I just thought it would be an interesting and fun little project. So I've picked the gourd that I think is the best shape, and what I'm doing now is using my laser level to draw a line halfway around. So you might just be able to see the line. But using the level like this gives me a nice line I can trace, and now that I've got that line, I can trim that, cut that out, and that'll give me the back half of this violin or fiddle. I had to look up what the difference was. Apparently there isn't one. It's to do with the type of music that gets played on them. But I'll cut this open now and see what's inside it. I've trimmed around the cut line on the gourd and around the end here. I'm using a diamond cut-off wheel on my little Dremel. Cutting that one gourd has almost flattened the battery, but it cuts it really easily. So if we break the end off there, we can have a look at what's inside. Here we go. So these are all the seeds. All the pulp on the inside just dries up and you just get left with the seeds. So what I'll do is I'll just randomly sprinkle these around the garden in all the corners, and the bits we don't go into, all around the edges, and we'll see what grows next year. But I'll collect all the seeds. But you can see how, yeah, it's quite thick, sort of woody outer shell. When I was cutting, I made sure that the chuck was on the side I didn't want, just in case I managed to touch it and scratch it, but I don't think I did, but just to be safe. But yeah, like I say, that little diamond wheel just goes straight through this really easily. This is the gourd after I've cut it in half and cleaned out the inside a little bit. And this is my kit of cheap violin making parts from AliExpress. So it's got the little pegs and the different little bits and pieces, and some strings and some other things I don't know the names of. But I've been comparing it to this real violin. Head gardener's father was a musician, so we have this, various other instruments around the house. So I'm just kind of copying this. like I say, I know nothing about these things, so I'm just going to make it up as I go along. But what I have done is, with a piece of tape, marked where this sort of neck bit will need to go, to give me the overall length. And I guess what I need to do is make the board that goes on the face of this. So if that's going to go in there like that, I need a piece of wood to go over to make this bit with the little sort of F-hole things cut in it. So I'm not sure what to use for that. I think it's supposed to be something like spruce. I don't know. I've got lots of ash lying around. I don't know if that's any good. But what I was thinking is this piece of, I believe it's mahogany, which I initially got to do the, I can get it out, to do the instrument panel in the Riley there, but in the end I decided to go for just a plain aluminium panel, because this isn't actually big enough and I couldn't be bothered doing all the work to join bits together. But it looks like this would just be big enough. Ooh, very close. I think if I cut a piece of this out, I could use this. It doesn't need to be that thick, and it seems to be, they seem to be quite thin. So I think what I would do is cut this out and then thin it down, plane it down or sand it down. But that's probably what I'll use there, unless I used a piece of Remu. I'm not sure if I've still got any possibly in there, or I could just use a piece of plywood, I guess. It's not really going to matter too much, I'm imagining, but we've got bits of oak around as well. No idea. Like I say, I've no idea how these things work. I'm just making it up as I go along. Obviously inspired by some other people on YouTube. Randall at Shed by the Tracks, when he restored a guitar that he had since he was a boy in the 1920s or something. And of course Carter Hair Restyling's classic home repair of the harpsichord series, things like that. But, yeah, I think that's probably enough on this today. I'll go back to working on the Riley, which is what I should be doing. A little more on this gourd instrument. I cut my mahogany, and I was looking at routing a step all the way around the edge to match the edge of the gourd, so it would sort of fit into it. But I couldn't actually think of a way that you can actually route that out, just because of the curve. So if I set up the router with the little fence, you could sort of do the outside curve bits, but when you get to these inside ones, you can't do it because you're trying to run up against a straight fence. So maybe there is a way to do it, but I don't know what it is. So instead, I cut out a piece of hardboard, shaped that to fit, and then cut out the middle, and that's been glued on. And so now this fits on like that. That'll all be glued, obviously, and it does fit reasonably well once the glue holds it all. So I think what I need to do next, I won't do anything yet. The glue has dried, but I'll probably leave it with some weights on it to make sure it's fully set, is I'll need to thin this out and also give it a little bit of a curved face. I think that'll just look nicer. Not sure how to do that with a plane maybe. And then I need to figure out how to join that sort of neck piece onto here nicely. I may need another piece of mahogany on the end here and then glue it onto that to sort of make all that nice. Okay, it's coming along, and like I say, this will all get varnished. These come up quite nice. It's almost like a burl type effect. Out after work, playing with this gourd violin thing again. Still don't know what I'm doing. I have to keep checking with the original violin to figure out how it all works. There's all sorts of little quirks to it. So this piece, for example, I've cut out a flat piece of mahogany, glued that on the end there, that this will join onto, and this is on a slight angle, and that's so that when this is joined onto there, this piece doesn't sit flat, it actually sits above the body. It will kind of sit like that, so there's a gap. And I have to figure out all these angles and gaps and things so that it kind of matches what a real violin looks like, more or less. So the size is about the same, but you can see how there's a gap there, and then there's this little bridgey bit, which I don't think that's glued down. I think that just sort of sits there. And then there's this bit at the back, which is sort of held on a little peg at the bottom there, I guess. So you can see there's like a little loop, and then that sort of chin bit kind of clamps to the body. So don't know why there's a scarf in there, but that's how it was. So I've been trying to figure out how to make this little bit at the back as well, so that this clamps to it and it provides the place where the peg goes through. So I've made a little block of mahogany, which I've shaped with the Dremel. Horrible job, there's sawdust everywhere. I'm assuming it's dust and it's dangerous. I should probably look up if this mahogany is toxic or not, because some woods can be quite toxic. I've got my mask there, and I try to keep the sawdust to a minimum. I do need to vacuum, but eventually this is all going to be glued together. I'm going to try and give this a curved surface and thin it out, because that's way too thick, and I have to cut the little holes. That'll all be glued together, and then this piece will get glued down the end here, kind of like that. Basically what I've tried to do is carve that out to shape that so that this face here and this face here are parallel when it's done. I don't think it's really going to matter. And then this will clamp onto that little block, kind of like that. Sort of chin bit. I should probably look up what all of these things are actually called. And then there is this little bit, and that I guess sort of floats because it'll hook over the peg. That'll bend. It'll be like that. The whole thing's going to be under quite a bit of tension, so I'll have to make it strong. I may look at inserting a dowel or a rod or something up in there, because otherwise that, I imagine, would be a weak point. That's kind of where I'm at today. I think, not sure what the best thing to do next is. Probably, I can't glue that on the end there until I've glued the gourd to the base or the top, whichever way you look at it. I think maybe the next thing to do will be trying to curve this off a little bit so that I can glue the two together. I guess, curve this off and cut out the little holes. But that's where I'm at. I actually came out to work on the car, but got distracted by this. I have been putting a curve on the face of this. It's not much of a curve, but you can see there is some crown there. It's not quite enough for this to sit flat, but it's pretty close, and I'm guessing those can bend a little bit. So that little bridge thing will fit in there. And the way I did that was, if you look at the side, you can see how it's thinned out. I used my belt sander. I've got it hooked up to my shop vac for the dust, and this has a lockable trigger, so I was just able to kind of rock, can't take it off, but rock it backwards and forwards across the belt, and that put that curve in it, which is quite good. I may just do a little bit on the linishing machine, I'm not sure, but I didn't want to thin it out too much at the bottom because I need quite a bit to glue that to, and I just need enough that this will sit reasonably well, and I think that will once the strings are on it. I'm guessing that'll sit there quite nicely. So I think the next thing I need to do is the little holes, and I also still need to figure out how I'm going to attach this to that. I'm just worried that if I just try to straight glue that, it's not going to be a very strong joint, and this is under tension, so I'm wondering if I should put a sort of a wooden dowel through there to help hold that all nice and tight. But I think that's probably enough of this tonight. I'll do a bit more later in the week. It's cold and wet and rainy today, so I don't feel like doing aluminium work because it's cold and it's hard on your hands. So I'm doing a little bit more on this gourd instrument. There's a website called, I think it's makingtheviolin.com, which is complete instructions and plans on how to build a real violin. But it's very useful to see how to actually make one and how they go together and what you're supposed to do. And it has useful templates. So I was able to print out a 1:1 scale template of the F holes. I'm assuming they're 1:1 scale. Let's just compare. Looks about right. And I was able to laser cut those on my little desktop laser, line it up on the center line of the body and trace around it. So what I need to do now is cut these out, and I'm going to use my scroll saw to do it. Doesn't have to be exact. This it's just kind of a fun project, so I'm not going to be too exacting with it. But yeah, it's interesting. I've learned a few things. The little marks here kind of show where the bridge goes, so it sits across there. I think what I need to do is drill the holes on the big end, and then I'm going to use my scroll saw to cut these out. But I have made it difficult for myself by this part, by gluing that piece on the end, because now that won't sit flat. So I'll have to pack this up on little blocks in order for it to sit flat so I can cut these out. I've roughly cut out the first hole. I'm going to finish off with hand files and sandpaper, I guess. I just taped a couple of blocks of MDF to the bottom of it to hold it flat, and that seems to be working. So I need to loosen the blade, poke it through the next hole, and cut the second one. I'm being really careful because I think this is my last scroll saw blade. This one's pretty blunt, and this is very hard wood.
I finished cutting and filing and sanding the F-holes. They're not perfect. I lost a bit of the sharpness on the corners, but good enough for a gourd, I think. So they kind of match up fairly well. I'm not sure what's next. I'm waiting for I need a special reamer, tapered reamer, to do the pegs at the end. So I think I'll wait till that arrives, which could take a couple of weeks, and make sure I can do the head part and ream those out to get the pegs in before I glue it all to this. But yeah, but like I say, it's a gourd. It doesn't need to be perfect. A little more tonight on this gourd violin. I glued an extra piece of wood into this little back piece, and I've cut out a notch. That'll go in there. That'll get reamed out for the button, which goes in the end there, which is what that tail piece hooks over. That'll all be glued in. And I measured, again, this isn't glued, but the neck is on an angle, and there's a measurement for where the fingerboard comes up because it doesn't sit flat. Where is it? This lifts above the body because it's on an angle like that. And I have measured, you measure the height to where the bridge goes, and that needs to be about 27 millimeters high. And then that means that the strings are all at the right height, I guess, above this board. So eventually all of this will be glued together. But because there's quite a lot of tension on the strings, I was worried about this just being a flat joint. So what I actually ended up doing was drilling it, and I've got a dowel in there. And that's not glued at the moment, it's all just push fit. I think I will sand this down so this is all flush and make this smooth when it comes to actually gluing it all together. But I'm not going to glue anything. I may actually be able to glue the body onto here. I don't want to glue this piece yet until I get the reamer and I can make sure that the pegs and things all work. Because if I glue it and mess it up, I'd then have to cut it all off. So I'll leave it loose, make sure I can get the little pegs in there and get them working. And if that works, then I can glue it all together. If I screw it up, I can always buy another one of these. This stuff is really cheap from AliExpress. I got a few other little bits and pieces, like just cheap ones of these, which are fine adjusters apparently, so you can adjust the tuning really finely. And I got a little electronic tuning box thing. I think it was $7, and that's including shipping. That will tell you if the strings are tuned properly. Because I have no idea how to tune it, if it's even going to be tunable. But it's coming along. So I'm going to let the glue, I had to make the hole in here a little bit oversized because I got it slightly off center. So I had to widen the hole out. So the peg is glued in there at the moment. I'm just holding this all down in the right position till that glue sets, and then I might put a little bit of epoxy around that, the little peg. For the peg, I used what came in the kit, which is these little pieces of dowel. And I did wonder what those were for. So in a real violin, there's a little dowel like that goes between the front and the back. I think it's called the sound peg or something like that. I don't know if you can see it in there. But it sort of goes between the two halves, and I think it's something to do with making the sound transfer between the two. Does this one? Yeah, you can sort of, I can see it in there. It's kind of on that side. It's just a dowel that goes between the front and the back. And apparently there's all sorts of things to do with how you position that and moving it around to get the best sound, I guess. This is where you can see this height difference and how these strings have to be a certain height above that. But, it's coming along. I've been using this site, makingtheviolin.com, and I also found an article in one of our local magazines called The Shed magazine, where a chap builds a violin and talks about it. So, interesting stuff. But I think that's almost as far as I can go with this. I can just do a little bit of sanding there until I get the reamer and the other bits and pieces, and then I can try and do the rest. And for a finish on this, I'm going to use shellac, which I think I've actually got some. I'm sure I've seen the crystals over here. I can't remember what I got this for. It was a long time ago. But these things, the crystals like this, should last forever, I believe, if you keep them out of the sun. It's once you actually dissolve them in alcohol, you can't keep the solution for too long, it goes off. So, orange shellac. Apparently there is a difference between waxed and de-waxed. I have no idea what this one is. Might have to look that up. But you basically dissolve these flakes in alcohol, denatured alcohol, which we never call it denatured alcohol here, we always call it methylated spirits, and it's usually kind of got a purple tinge to it, and you dissolve the flakes in that to a certain ratio, and that gives you the finish that you can then rub onto this. I think that's probably what I'll do with it. But that's about it for now. Did a little more on the gourd violin yesterday. This is all glued together now. The neck piece isn't glued in yet because I want to make sure I can sort out the pegs properly, and then of course that'll get all glued together. It's approximately where the bridge goes. I did put some sandpaper on here and sanded the little feet so that they're going to sit flat, and the little chin piece will just sort of clamp to that block. That's not clamped on at the moment. You can see this is all glued now. Didn't get a perfect fit. It's kind of, the gourd has actually changed shape a little bit, I think, since I made the top. It's probably relaxed a bit after it's been cut, I imagine. But that's okay, doesn't have to be perfect. I just sort of thinned around here just to blend it in. And just to make this joint stronger, I used one of the sound post, or sound pegs, I think it's called, pieces of wood, drilled that in the end, epoxied that in, so I can get a really nice strong joint there, because of course there's a lot of tension on the strings. But that's where it's at. Working on this gourd again. I epoxied the neck piece onto the body, and I've sort of sanded that back. Everything's going to get a coat of shellac, or probably multiple coats of shellac, and then I'll glue this fingerboard on later, and I think it's called the nut that goes here. I've reamed out the holes for the pegs. I had to buy this reamer, tapered reamer, much the same as a metalworking type one. It's only got flutes on half the side, or half the diameter, circumference, I guess. So that did the trick though. That wasn't expensive. And now the pegs fit through the little tapered holes. I wasn't sure how far through they should protrude, so I've gone for about 1/8 of an inch, which matches the real violin we've got. And then I had to figure out how to drill the cross holes in the little pegs where the strings go through. So I made a little block of oak that's been drilled through that way, and then I used the tapered reamer on it so that the peg is a tight fit, and I figured out where the hole needed to go and drilled the cross hole, and then I used that as a little jig, or is it a fixture? I always get those two muddled up, but that's my guide for drilling the holes through the pegs. That worked really well, and I just did a little countersink on the edge of the holes. So now when those are in there, that hole should be in the middle, which seems to be how the other violin is done, and the strings will go through. The strings are coloured, but I don't know what the colours mean, so I don't know which string is which. So I think what I'll have to do is probably measure the diameter and figure out which string is going from the thickest to the finest. I can't actually remember the notes that there are on a violin. I don't even know notes very well because I don't know anything about music. So I know the thickest string is G, but I'll figure that out. And so with that done, I think basically now I can sand this down and start coating it, because everything else that goes on there is done afterwards. So that's probably what I'll do. Because I'm a metal worker really, not a woodworker, every time I touch this it ends up filthy, because I've always got aluminium dust on my hands or things like that. But I can't shellac it today anyway, because I forgot you have to mix it up kind of a day in advance. I'm going to use the flakes, and you have to dissolve them in alcohol, which takes quite a while. I think you generally leave it overnight. Yeah, leave overnight and shake before use. Container with a lid. So that's what I'll use. No idea what colour it's going to come up. No idea what the gourd's going to look like when it's covered in this stuff. But with this, you just keep applying layers until you get the finish that you want. Each layer melts into the previous one, kind of self-dissolves itself. So I should probably mix some of that up, and that'll be a job during the week. I did wonder what these two little holes were for originally, but I think those were how they held this down to machine it. I suspect that's what those are for. And I'll have to figure out what I'll use to glue this in place. These are usually made so that they can be removed relatively easily, I believe. But realistically, this isn't going to get worn out, so I'll probably just glue it on with normal wood glue or epoxy. But that's where that one is at the moment. I've mixed up the shellac just based on the instructions. It just says equal volumes with methylated spirits in a jar with a lid and leave it overnight. So I guess that will slowly dissolve over time. I'll keep an eye on it, see what it does. It is dissolving. So I just used a little stainless steel bowl, mixed up, filled it with shellac in the jar, filled it with meth in the jar. We'll see how that goes, but I'll keep an eye on it over the day, see how well it dissolves down. And I think then all I need to do is sand this and start giving it coats. What I might do is, because I've got that hole in the bottom, I might make a wooden stand that I can sit this down on so that I can hold it up and put the shellac on it. Although the shellac dries so fast, you can do one bit and then come back to it a minute later and it should be dry. So we'll see. I'll give it a few tests first anyway. But you have to leave it overnight, so that won't be a job for today. Today I have shellacked the gourd violin. I don't know how many coats there are on there. I just kept sort of rubbing it on, basically. I haven't tried to make it perfect. It's a gourd, but it's all right. It looks fine. It's gonna be rustic is probably the way I would put it. Just drop my toothpick. I just had basically, if I hold this up, dropped another toothpick. I've got a paintbrush in the vise, and it's sitting on the little peg that goes in the bottom, the hole for the peg. So I'll probably leave that. It dries pretty quick, but I'm going to leave it overnight. And then apparently what you can do is rub it down with steel wool and put another coat. So I may do a few more coats and try and get it looking a bit more glossy. And then that'll be it. I'll probably end up just waxing it. And I've taped over that because I need to glue the fingerboard onto there and the nut at the top there. But that'll be job later in the week. I think I'll put a few more coats of the shellac. I might need to mix up some more. You can tell we're going into summer because there are flies around, which is annoying. Working on this gourd violin again. I've done coats of shellac on this. I didn't try to get it perfect. It's a gourd, so rubbed it on over a couple of days. Rubbed it back a bit with steel wool if there were any runs or anything like that, and then just gave it another gentle coat. And I'll end up waxing the whole thing, I think. And I've glued on the fingerboard, I think it's called. And I've started making a piece called the nut, which goes at the end here, and that's what the strings go over. So this needs a little bit of shaping, and I'm just kind of copying an actual violin. And then once that's done, that will get glued on. I need to cut little grooves in it with a small file. Once I figure out where the strings go, I guess. I think there's actual measurements that you use to cut the grooves in the right place. That'll guide the strings. Bridge that's there, all the stuff at the back. It's kind of getting there. And I've just glued this in place. That's what the tape is doing, it's holding it. I did order a cheap bow from China, but it seems to have been sent back to the sender, whatever that means. So I've messaged them to find out what the story is. Because it's a cheap violin, I only need a cheap bow. I think all these parts cost something like $11 US, no, $11 New Zealand, plus whatever the shipping was, and the shipping wasn't much more than that. So there's like $20 worth of parts in this. I think the cheapest bow I can find in New Zealand that's like a student bow is about $80, so 4 times that. So I'd rather stick with the theme and go for the cheapest possible just to see if it works. I do have the bow from the actual violin to test it with though, of course. And that's where that's at today. It's looking okay. It's got a bit of gloss to it. It's a bit rough, the surface. I mean, if I was doing this properly, you would sand it all down and get it perfectly glossy smooth. But no, I think it looks fine. Today on this gourd violin, this is all glued now. I've glued the nut on there. I think you're probably supposed to do a bit more shaping on that kind of thing, but that's the only one I've got, so I didn't want to mess it up. I might hand sand it just to curve off that edge where the strings drop down. I think that's what you're supposed to do. It's a bit sharp there at the moment. And I attach the chin rest that kind of just clamps on the bottom. And I think the next thing to do will be put the pegs in and see where the strings go, so I can figure out exactly what this needs to look like. But I think pretty much it just needs sort of rounding off on that corner, and that should really be it. And then it's just a matter of fitting the pegs and fitting the strings. I did look up what the strings are. It goes G, D, A, E apparently, and I can measure the diameter of the strings and figure out which one's which. I did buy, let's see, I got This only came with one adjuster, but I did buy more adjusters because I figure this is probably going to be hard to tune, so I might as well make it easier for myself and get the proper adjusters so you can tune it. And the cheap bow I got from China apparently got sent back to the sender, so they're going to refund me. I had to order another one from a different seller, and I think that ended up costing about $30 because I want this to be as cheap as possible. But we're getting there, and it kind of looks like a sort of violin thing, I guess. The other thing I'll do is, of course, wax it all. Not sure if you're supposed to wax this or not. I guess it won't hurt, and it'll probably improve the appearance of it. So that'll be next. Have finished sanding the nut, and I filed little grooves into it. It's all glued in place. So I decided it was time to fit the strings. The strings do go G, D, E, A. No, G, D, A, E. Sorry. You can see I had to look that up. And I ended up having to adjust the bridge to get the height of the strings correct. And I should say that obviously I know nothing about how to do this or what I'm doing. I just found a useful website called makingtheviolin.com, and I just stole all the measurements from there. But it looks like these things are built to specific dimensions for them to work. So I've just kind of copied those as much as I can. You can see my fingerboard is actually a little bit off center, which isn't good. There's not much I can do about that. You can sort of shift the bridge a little bit to adjust it, but then the things are on a weird angle, so I'm not sure that's quite right. There seems to be a place where, with the tension on the strings, it finds where it needs to sit, more or less. So I've got the strings, I've got them in the right order. So fattest at the bottom, going to the thinnest at the top. And threading on the pegs wasn't too hard, but it helps. You do this one, then this one, and then this one, and then that one last. If you go this one, this one, this one, it gets hard to thread the strings through. I'm sure there are proper ways of doing this. I have no idea what they are. And then I just needed to tune it, and I found a little app online that'll do that. And if we can show this, you just kind of select your string, and it'll and then you can adjust it with the little fine adjusters. So I've never tuned an instrument in my life. Like I say, I don't really know what I'm doing, but obviously when you adjust one string, it affects the tension on all the others, because this is all just kind of floating, or hanging rather, off the little sort of string at the end. So what I found is you kind of get it roughly adjusted, and then you slowly have to keep tweaking them. You have to keep going round and round and round, adjusting them smaller and smaller amounts. It was a really good idea getting these little adjusters for each of the strings, because I never would have been able to do it with the pegs. So I think it's just a matter of going round like this and slowly adjusting till everything's in the right place. But I've no idea if it'll hold its tune. It'll probably all shift. I suspect, and it says this in the instructions, once you tune it, you need to leave it sitting, because everything settles, especially this. I mean, it's a gourd. It's not a real violin, so goodness knows what it's going to do. But it does kind of make noise. I don't know if I can do this with one hand. Probably not. Like I say, no idea what I'm doing. But it makes noise, so that top string, the E string, definitely makes noise. But it looks like there's all sorts of things you're supposed to do to get the strings the exact right height and the positioning all correct and everything in the right places. But I would say that is a gourd violin. Kind of looks the part, makes vaguely violin sounds. I have no idea if it's playable. I don't know how to play one, which kind of makes this a bit of a strange project, I guess. Why make something you can't use? But I had a pile of gourds. I didn't know what to do with them, so here's what we came up with. I may give the body a rub down with some wax, furniture wax, but the shellacs actually come out pretty well. And I guess I need to find a violinist, someone who can actually test it, see if it kind of works. So here it is, pretty much finished. I do need to redo the bridge, adjust the bridge, because I've got it too flat, so it's actually quite hard to hit the middle two strings without touching the outside ones. And Head Gardner, who does know how to play a violin, this is the bow from her violin, which I'm borrowing at the moment. This whole thing cost, I think it was $11 for all the violin parts from China. 11 New Zealand dollars, that's ridiculously cheap. I did buy extra little fine tuners, and I did buy the cheapest bow I could find, which was also about 10 New Zealand dollars, but unfortunately that one went missing, so they're refunding me, and I've ordered a second one, which again was only about 13 New Zealand dollars. All dirt cheap. Obviously it's not going to be very high quality, but it's a gourd, so I think it'll work. I wanted to see if I can show what it sounds like, at least the strings, individual strings. So Head Gardner helped me tune it, and we also put some rosin on the bow. You might be able to see that on the strings. So hopefully I can show what the notes sound like. Let's see how well this works. So you can see it makes the right kind of sounds. It'd be really interesting to see if somebody who can actually play properly could actually use it. Obviously I can't, but I'm really pleased with how that came out. Even if it's never played, it's a nice looking little ornament. And definitely a good use of a gourd. I need to figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of them now.